I'm Josh Davis. We're here on the Genesis Ag podcast today. We've got Mark Rothermich joining us today for another session. I want to talk a little bit, Mark, about some things we've got going on, some specific products and what those products do. And so pleased to have you here with us today. I guess the first product that I've been getting a lot of questions about is Carbose. So tell me what Carbose is for you and how you project that to your customers, and give us just a synopsis on the product itself.
Thanks for having me today, Josh. I do appreciate a chance to chat with you. And I'm good with giving you a little bit of my thoughts, but I think also it'll be important for you to fill in some gaps, because there may be some things that you understand about Carbos, maybe even beyond what I do. So when I talk with a customer, typically it's a person that's already using some sort of sugar. There's a lot of interest in the industry for using sugars for feeding their biology. Some guys understand that. Some guys just use sugar because somebody told them they should use sugar. And I think you and I will get into it today, but there's a lot more to it, what meets the eye and what some people think about. So when I think about Carbose, obviously it's a generated sugar. It's very highly concentrated. The calorie count on the 4 ounce, which is our typical 4 ounce use rate, calorie count is really good with that, comparing to a lot of other sources. And in addition to that, we've got the bacterial components in there also that continue to build upon that food source when they get in the soil. That's just a general overview from my perspective. Tell me how you present the product, Josh.
And looking at just a raw sugar source, first off, like you mentioned, we've got tons more calories than anything like a raw table sugar or molasses-based product or any of those, because it's specifically generated to be an energy source. But the thing that kind of separates us from a lot of other products out in the market is how diverse the product actually is, having 4 forms of sugar in it. Most people want to say, well, I'm going to run down to Sam's Club or Costco and get a pallet of sugar. And yeah, they're putting sugar out there, but they don't really understand what forms of sugar are present in that product, and in turn, what those forms of sugar, how they stimulate biology. It's like in a lot of tests that you see nowadays is dextrose is a big product that's put out there, and you see a large portion of people doing that based on yield responses that are out in the industry from those early foliar applications, because dextrose stimulates certain groups of biology to aid vegetative growth. So yeah, you see a little bit of a yield bump out of that, but how many people actually know that dextrose feeds those groups of microbes? So when I tell people something along those lines, and maybe what another sugar does for the plant, they're putting sugar out there as a feel good. I think with Carbose, it promotes an understanding of what we're actually trying to do for the plant and for the soil, because that's what Carbose is doing, is it's beefing up that exchange. It's stimulating the plant to then secrete sugars so the soil biology can meet the plant's demands. It's beefing up that relationship. So in looking at having 4 forms of sugar along with the bacteria to keep regenerating energy, when you put Carbose out there, because it really ramps up the whole arena out there that we're farming on.
So you mentioned that we do have 4 types of sugar in Carbose. And a lot of the time when I explain that to somebody, I like to say that we feel that causes a wider bloom of microbial activity because of that fact that different biology prefers different food sources. Is that an accurate way of looking at it, Josh?
Yeah, that's definitely how we need to look at it. And yeah, there are more than 4 forms of sugar out there, but these are ones that we've deemed to be necessary for what we're doing within our products and stimulating native soil biology. So yes, every form of sugar stimulates different forms of biology. Yes, it's a raw energy source, so really anything could feed on it. But if you've got a great working ecosystem or have the implementation of a biological product, this is pretty well going to fuel that.
So let's talk briefly, Josh. Also, maybe let's touch on the fact, like you had mentioned, sugar, and that was the term that we used so far in our conversation. But you also mentioned molasses earlier as a source that a lot of people look to. Talk a little bit in comparison between Carbos and molasses.
I think the first thing to look at, and I guess the easiest way to gauge energy that you're creating, is in calories. And if you measure the amount of calories in 1 gallon of molasses, you're anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 calories in 1 gallon. And once the soil biology consumes those 12,000 calories, there's nothing left. You have to replenish the tank, much like we have to in our gas or diesel powered vehicles. We've got to keep filling the tank up. Whereas with Carbos, there's a specific number of calories that you're putting out there, with 1 ounce potentially creating around 1 million calories because of the biology. But that biological capacity in that product can continue to generate calories. It's not to the specific level of application, but we're continuing. We never run out as long as this product is functional.
We've hit on the fact that we do have a biological component in there with the bacteria. We talk about the rhizophagy cycle, where the bacteria moves into the root and then back out and works through that system. And it was explained to me that some of the bacteria that we have in Carbos actually functions in the same way. And beyond that, they actually marry with that plant. So when we apply this to our crop, that bacteria will only associate with that particular plant and interact in and out through that root system continuously through the year. Is that accurate from your understanding?
Yeah, so that specific plant becomes a host for the biology really that's in any of our products. There's very few biological groups that move from plant to plant. You've got your one system there, which would be the whole plant, roots and everything, that will be the host at that point. So yeah, it functions with the plant, with the soil, creating that exchange. Like you mentioned, the rhizophagy cycle, that plant will recognize that group of biology and vice versa, and it will, in a sense, marry itself to that plant.
Yeah, that was exactly the way your dad described it last year when we were talking about it, is as a marriage, in the fact that they join until death do they part, whenever that plant dies.
I think the biggest thing with the product would just be the ease of use. With what we've talked about so far, with it being 4 forms of sugar versus, in theory, our competition is the guy going and buying a pallet of table sugar at Sam's or Costco, looking at having a jug there. We can create more energy with 1 jug of our product than a whole flat of sugar from your local retailer.
I've found that exact thing, in that low use rate, typically 4 ounces is a pretty common. Some guys will bump that up to 6 or 8 in different circumstances if they really want to push things a little bit. You know, at 4 ounces, a 2.5 gallon jug is doing 80 acres. Guys find it so easy to grab that 2.5 gallon jug when they're filling the sprayer, as opposed to multiple jugs of something that might have a gallon use rate. And they really like that, the low or the highly concentrated low use rate product.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't have to worry about cutting 50-pound bags up and dumping it all over your nurse trailer and all over your sprayer, and then it maybe not goes directly into solution and all that. We've already got it there as easy as we can get it to use.
And one of the other comments I've heard in the past is, in the spring, especially when guys are getting started with burn downs, oftentimes the weather's cold, the product that they're using might be cold. Their water, depending on how they're storing it, might be cold. And sometimes some of the molasses products especially can be very difficult to mix in cold conditions. Have you ever had a complaint under any kind of circumstances with Carbos being hard to mix?
No, the thing about the Carbose, and you mentioned cold weather, is the only thing about this product is you don't want to let it freeze because it is a living product, being a biological. But as far as creating any issues in the tank or anything along those lines, we've never experienced anything like that. It's very easy to use. You mentioned putting it with your spring burn down. We can make chemistry work better. We can get a more effective weed kill just based on what's in that product and the makeup of it. We can make everything work better.
So we've talked about using it in burn down. Let's talk about some of the other ways that Carbose is used by our customers.
I sell it as a every use product. I tell guys every time you go across the field, put 4 ounces in. And it really is more of a habit for guys once they get comfortable with it, because 4 ounces of Carbose or 6, if you're in a higher yield threshold, it is just what it is. That's part of the program. Once they do it one time, they're like, man, this is easy. It's cheap. I don't have the hassle of all these high volume things, and it makes everything work better. So it's very simple, easy to integrate into a program, whether it be spring burn down, whether it be with your pop-up in furrow, whether it be post-emerge chemistry, nutrient application, fungicides, whatever it be. I've got some guys that go across 6 to 8 times, depending on how many fungicides they do. And it's just that simple.
Obviously, with Genesis Ag, we're very strong in the biological market, a lot of experience, a lot of background in that. And the Carbose is just such a natural fit for that planting time application, in furrow applications, or even broadcast. The biology flourishes when it's fed by the plant, or fed, I guess I should say. It needs some sort of food source to really ramp up and go. And sometimes we don't think about the fact that a young corn plant, until it gets some size to it, there's not a lot of photosynthesis happening to the extent that it may be feeding much out into the root zone yet. So we can put Carbose in that root zone, feed this biology immediately, and let it start doing its thing even before the plant may be able to help it.
Oh, for sure. Carbose would be a great standalone product. I know it would be low use rate or anything like that, but we actually tested this several years ago before we just fell into the Carbose as an every use product. Tested Carbose as a standalone in furrow, and it worked phenomenally. Mm-hmm. But from a farmer's perspective, you say, hey, the only thing you need to put is water and $1.70 worth of product in the row, and they're going to look at you like, what am I doing that for? But we actually did have some great responses.
You mentioned $1.70 at that 4 ounce use rate. Yeah, we're under $2 an acre. And I remember those studies when we talked about them. When you figure the ROI as a percentage, when you're only investing $2 and you get a couple bushel return back for that, even that ROI percentage is astounding.
Yeah, for sure. And for something that guys want to see at least a 2-to-1 return, we may be at a 4-to-1, 8-to-1, 10-to-1 return on that investment, but it's still, people always say, I need to do more than that. That's a really good way to put it, though, is for less than $2, what's your measuring stick?
Exactly. Yeah. Josh, one thing I would like to address while I've got you here today is I come across people from time to time who have the concept that when they spray sugar as a foliar application, that the sugar is directly absorbed into the plant. And in that, we've all heard about, we want to ramp up our Brix levels and things like that. Can you talk a little bit in regards to that? Are there sugar sources that do move directly into the plant or do most of them feed the biology that may be on the plant or in the root zone?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I actually had this conversation with a guy earlier today. Is the plant will absorb just a little bit through the foliage, and it may not be a specific sugar at any given time. It may just be that specific day that could be what the plant was hungry for. It got a taste of it on its skin and basically licked it off. But to your point is we're feeding the soil and the soil biology to really ramp up the relationship between the plant and the soil. That way the exchange of sugars from the plant to the soil happens at a much higher capacity to meet the demands of the plant. So the sugar secretion by the plant is increased to then re-propagate the soil biology. So a lot of people want to think foliar feeding, it's got to be on the plant, when in fact the plant really doesn't take much in through the leaves. That's what they're there for, photosynthesis. It's to stimulate the soil biology. I can remember several years ago, guys were saying, well, what if I use a bander instead of just doing a full broadcast and spray it on the plant? You're not stimulating the whole soil biology. That V2, V3 stage, people are always saying, well, I don't have a lot of foliage, I'm not getting a lot on the plant. You're looking at it the wrong way. In that perspective, your plant is only going to do as good as the soil that it's under or growing out of. So therefore, we need to really pour the gas to the soil. Then that's where the yield comes from.
So maybe let's take this another direction. You mentioned, as we just talked about, that the sugar, the biggest part of that is to feed the soil biology. But we also talked about applications where we go out into scenarios where we've got a full canopy in place with some of our later season applications. So we're basically applying Carbose to the foliage of the plant, but yet we want a lot of the reaction to happen in the soil. Share with us how that process works for the sugars and things to move from the plant leaf to the soil surface.
The plant can actually move things on its surface to the soil. That's where humidity or dews or anything like that, the plants have the characteristics to move that to the stalk from the leaf and then down the stalk on the external portions of the plant. And it gets to the soil. That's where if you see any roots above the ground growing out, you see the moisture off of that, and a lot of that is coming from down the plant. So it eventually gets to the soil, but the plant is not really going to take it in to, per se, the full capacity. It's going to move it there, and that may take a couple of days to get it to the soil.
So we don't have to be apprehensive then from what you're saying about having to have rainfall or irrigation necessarily to get benefit from a product like Carbose when it's applied to the foliage.
Correct. And if we get our biological system working in place, it's only going to work that much better. And things like rainfall or heat or a lot of the things that we see as high stress points in the plant are going to then be limited because of the advanced biological bloom that we've created.
So, Josh, I know as I've worked with producers over the years, and a lot of them have converted to using Carbose, oftentimes the things that I hear as to reasons that they use it or why they stay with Carbose would be low use rates that we talked about a little bit, ease of handling, ease of mixing. All of those things make it a great package for somebody that's looking for a sugar source. What are some other things that you hear maybe, or results that you might have seen from some of your customers?
As far as results, I've got a lot of guys that say my chemistry works a lot better as far as getting their burn down more effective, even a post-emerge application. We've reduced the amount of burns with some of the chemistries on really any crop because there's nothing really totally safe, but the chemical effects, we've lessened the effects to the respective crop that we're trying to grow. But it's really as simple as once a guy starts using it, sees the benefits of it, it's a no questions asked product. Carbose is automatically in the tank. So just the feasibility of the product, it's simple, it's easy to use, low use rate. Whenever I put programs together for guys now, it's just automatically, hey, I'm going to get 100 gallons or I'm going to get a tote because I got to put 4 ounces of Carbose in every time. And it's not something you got to keep rehashing with guys that say, hey, are you going to get your Carbose? Hey, are you using a sugar? It's in their program.
We talked a little bit about how a lot of our customers are already familiar with using sugars. And of course, when we start talking about a biological program of ours, we are able to stress the importance of using a sugar. But occasionally I come across a customer who's not using sugar, or maybe they used a sugar in the past and they didn't see a particular yield increase from adding 2 pounds of sugar as we might have done in the years past. What do you say to somebody that might be in that position? It's like, why should I really use a sugar? Why should I even, when obviously it's hard to find even a couple bushel yield increase, as we talked about, a great return. But in a farm setting, it's hard to see a 2 bushel yield increase. So how do you present this to a customer as to a reason they should consider adding a product like Carbose to their package?
I always talk to guys and try to create the understanding that they recognize that they have native soil biology and that that's their natural soil. That's what they farm on. That's what they've purchased if they own the land or if they rent it from someone else. And I look at it like that's a bank. And it's a continual deposit through standard practice that we've got an untapped resource out there that we aren't really even scratching the surface on. So integrating Carbose just to stimulate native soil biology can help someone start tapping into that. It's like you said, how do you recognize a couple bushel yield increase? I think it's first understanding where they are and understanding that there's more to farming than just dumping out NP and K and putting the seed in the ground and then taking it to yield. It's understanding the relationship between the respective crop that they're trying to grow and the soil. And that's where the exchanges happen. It doesn't matter how much fertility, how much chemistry, none of that really plays a factor in increasing yield. It's getting more biology stimulated.
I really like the way you put that, Josh, because you're right. We've all got a native environment that we're growing in, and we have to move beyond just looking at NP and K as the driving force in our farms. And I talk a lot anymore about building a system of products to optimize your crops. And that's where Carbose fits in really well.
Yeah, and I've got a lot of guys that Carbose spending $1.70 on a couple applications is their first exposure. I get that every year that, 1,000-acre farmer calls, and what's the easiest thing I can do? I say put 4 ounces of Carbose with your chemistry passes, and if you can put it in your planter with the pop-up. And it may be a 2 application cycle that first year, and then you fill a phone call later that fall, like, wow, my stuff's doing really good. And the only thing that they changed in their program was integrating 4 ounces of Carbose once or twice in the program. And then that's where the exposure from us to them as they start seeing what we're doing and seeing some of our successes. And that's the growing point. So a big shout out to Mark for being on here today to chat a little bit about Carbose. And Mark, really appreciate having you on here.
You bet, Josh. It's always fun to sit back and kick ideas around and talk about some of the things that we share every day.
Again, I want to thank Mark for being here today and being part of the Genesis Ag podcast, and hope you can join the next one.